Okay. Hello, my name is Dorotea López. I'm the director of the International Studies at the University of Chile. And today I will have the pleasure to interview Mia Mikic for this second series of interview that the Friends of Multilateralism group conducts after each ministerial conference. I will have the privilege of speaking with her about the role of trade policy in gender equality and the outcomes of the 13th Ministerial Conference on this topic. First of all, let me introduce her. Mia is a trade economist, educator, and an avid networker. She's a board member of the Friends of Multilateralism group. She is a research fellow at Waikato University in New Zealand and an advisor to the Asia Pacific Trade Research and Training Network. She is also a visiting professor at the Institute for Eurasian Studies in Zagreb. She worked for many years in the UN Department of Trade and Investment. And I believe we are with the ideal person to explain the progress and challenges we face today for more inclusive trade, the great importance of doing more in this area. Mia. Today, there seems to be more attention being paid to how international trade policies can affect gender equality, to be more inclusive in many ways. Many studies have shown that trade policy is not gender neutral, something that we used to believe for a long time, or we used to work for a long time with this idea. That means that the distributional outcomes of trade may differ between women and men because of the different roles they play in society, they play in the economy. So therefore, trade policies we know should be designed with an eye to their impact on gender, power, and opportunity, so they don't widen these existing gaps that we already have. So I would like to ask you how trade policy can contribute to gender equality. And thanks for this interview.
Thank you, Dorotea. And I feel you shortchange yourself, with introducing you yourself very briefly. But you have a huge career also that has, put marked on these issues and many other issues in trade. So I hope our listeners will be able to pick up on all of your own achievements. But I'm very happy that we are both together in this Friends of Multilateralism group, and through these interviews we are really trying to also build awareness of these new issues and new concerns, and obviously trade policy and linkages to gender equality and women's economic empowerment are among the top of the new issues that we want to talk about in the context of how we can improve the impacts of trade and all these trade agreements that are being done by WTO members on gender equality. But in that context of building awareness and advocacy for the issues, I think it's also maybe useful for me to start answering this by bringing really very briefly the meanings of some terms that we'll be using in this conversation. So when we talk about gender equality, we really simply mean that we think, or we imply, that all genders are free to pursue whatever career, lifestyle choices, and abilities they want to pursue without any discrimination, right? And then in that context, we talk about more specifically about women empowerment and gender mainstreaming. So I think these are the processes through which we allow gender equality to take hold. And obviously there are many nuances in that. That our listeners should know. You were co-editor of the book that really pays lots of attention to linkages between trade policy and gender equality, and you are perhaps more qualified than myself to answer this. But going back to your question, I think the answer definitely should be put in a context of a specific environment of a specific country and the sector we are looking at, because it is no universal impact that that we, or the same impact that we can find across the board. But there are some commonalities, and so when we look and explore the impact of trade policy on gender equality, we can talk about two different approaches that typically are seen in that exposition. One is top-down approach, and another one is bottom-up approach. And as in other things in economic policies, bottom up would imply that from the roots up we change, for example, legislation, laws, behaviors, rules that exist in a particular environment, so that they are more they allow gender equality to be pursued. And so it is sort of organic change, and obviously, as all organic changes, they may take some time, and they may have some setbacks, etc. And then when we talk about top-down approaches, we are actually thinking about having some external force that would have an impact on these changes. And so in the context of trade policy, we always see multilateral rules at the level of the WTO now, or regional trade agreements as such external impetus for the changes of laws and regulations in the domestic in a country, to actually then adhere to international obligations that relate to gender equality. Sometimes if it is top down and it's not accepted by everyone in the society, it may create some issues and tensions. So there are these different approaches in the context of how do we go about using trade policy to contribute to gender equality. And then there are other factors, as you may want to also add to these, but we have to also be cognizant that trade policy creates positive and negative contributions to gender equality. And so depending on really what sort of economy we are talking about, which sectors are we talking about, women workers intensive sectors, trade liberalization may create certain disruptions in the sector that can actually increase original existing gender equalities, like gender wage gap, or even the using the fact that in many countries the woman unskilled labor is cheaper, to use that fact to build on competitive advantages and not improving the labor standards for women working in those sectors that are deemed to be export competitive. So there are different factors that we need to take into account when we look how trade policy can contribute to gender equality. Sorry. Back to you, Dorotea. I think you can complement what I'm saying also.
No, thanks. Thanks, Mia. I think your answer is, I mean, it's quite complicated to in 5 minutes try to summarize such a relation that is really complicated, because you have to understand from different sides of the story, because women, we are employees, we are entrepreneurs, we are so there are different things that we have to study. And thanks for mentioning the book, where you are one of my favorite authors, I have to say. But before going to your chapter that we will speak about it, I would like to move to the next question. as you are aware, international organizations, think tanks, and countries, they are now turning their focus to developing a better understanding of this relation that you were explaining before. And we have these initiatives going with other legal instruments that we have, like the 1979 UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or the Addis Ababa Agenda for Action in 2015, or when in 2020, the UN General Assembly has called upon WTO and the World Bank and other international bodies to implement the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action to Protect Women's Rights, and more recently, the 23 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where we have the goals 5 and the goal 17, and they explicitly go to this relation between trade, gender, and development that is quite important for us. So I would like you, if you can go through a little bit the progress made in recent years, both multilaterally that you mentioned, some of them, and bilaterally that you also mentioned before. But if you could explain us a little bit more regarding this to
two levels of basically work towards putting trade policy really sort of more closely in to the task of improving gender equality. Yes, there are. I mean, when we talk about trade agreements, then obviously we think about the multilateral trade agreements that are signed by all WTO members in the at that level for the whole membership. But then we also have agreements that are signed by subset of members, and they can be regional trade agreements in the context of bilateral, plurilateral, these mega regionals, right? That we now have in almost all regions of the world, and then, of course, we can have different arrangements that are not necessarily proper trade agreements. So let me speak to regional trade agreements that countries have been signing. And as our listeners would know, we have many trade agreements. I think there are over 350 in force at present. And different research outputs have shown that about 20% of these agreements in force have some explicit mention of gender equality or women's economic empowerment, right? And one would think that this is a sort of bad or good result, but it is necessary to really look into the under that average number into what is being signed in these trade agreements. And so what we find is that trade agreements that do include this explicit mention of gender equality do not do it in a way that they address other issues in the text of the agreement. So very often the mentions are what we call aspirational. They lead towards really confirming general commitments towards gender equality and adherence to some international conventions that they may exist, or even including the general ILO conventions, but they don't necessarily go into the language that is considered binding, and I don't think we have time to actually go into really providing different examples, but I'll try to do so, and perhaps mention the success of Canada that have been, putting gender equality to the forefront in its free trade agreements, and with countries like Chile, with Israel, more recently with Ukraine, where some of these provisions have been made even binding, right? I think at the multilateral level, we have had much less success, and there could be a dispute whether the just sort of approved domestic regulation in services is proper multilateral agreement or not, but we have gotten quite a large subset of WTO members that have actually signed to it. And the importance of that particular agreement is that in one of its Article 19, it actually introduces a very explicit non-discrimination principle with respect to providers of services not to be discriminated based on their sex. So actually excludes possibility of discrimination between women and men. And the importance of having such provision is that it is actually possible to imagine that such provision can find its way in all other agreements as a general provision, and that it includes sort of a principle in which we will approach negotiating these agreements. In terms of the arrangements, we also had progress made through something that is called Global Trade and Gender arrangement. I think it was signed initially by Canada, New Zealand, and is it Singapore or Chile? I have been forgetting these. You can correct me, please, in that context. But it has been joined now. I'm just checking my countries. Yeah, it was
Chile, Canada,
Chile, Canada, Chile, and New
Mexico.
Zealand. Yes. Now joined by Mexico, Costa Rica, Ecuador,
Mexico,
right?
Costa Rica. Yes.
And so this is important because it allows countries to, I think, maybe in a less threatening way, to try to include the language that goes forward in terms of supporting gender equality more explicitly in the in intergovernmental agreements, right? And then we have, of course, unilateral progresses in countries like Canada that employs gender-based analysis in the process of formulating and implementing of their trade, not only trade but other policies as well. And that is important because it allows a sort of building a body of evidence in terms of how different approach to trade policy impact not only women but also other marginalized groups in the society. I don't know if I have answered your question because I think my thought
Absolutely
went into other direction. But yeah, these are the new I think more recent advances in that we should take into consideration in addition to those that are made through the UN process with respect to gender equality. And these are specifically related and directed towards trade and trade agreements. Yes.
Thanks, Mia. No, I think Chile was the first country to have a chapter on in the agreement with Uruguay. So I've seen, like, at the beginning we were a little bit disappointed because it was like a soft law, as you say, that it was a non-binding, and so but now I've seen a little bit going up and trying to enforce these dispositions, or trying to make the cooperation or the capacity building or other sides of other points of the same chapter that could work. So what I believe is we have to keep pushing in that direction. We have to keep going in that
I think
direction.
so. Yeah, I think so, because you see, we need to be, you can approach it from the position of this non-discrimination on, or as in JITAGA, non-derogation, where, you know, explicitly it's talked about not using basically the discriminative approach to women or other marginalized groups in creating competitive advantages, right? And so that, or also more proactively, maybe carving out a certain policy space so that domestically you can promote interests of women and other groups, right? So I think we need to go into that direction, and I sort of like the approach of negotiators to park those ideas into economic cooperation chapters, right? And so that they, particularly with trading partners that are not open to maybe more enforceable provisions, and so then you can put in there a concrete plans and the language that the parties will actually cooperate on building capacity of women so that they can use the opportunities that will be created by, you know, opening market access to them, or opening digital trade, or, you know, financial services or others, right? And I think by mentioning that, you don't create binding enforceable and, you know, parts of the agreement that are open to later dispute, but you are creating awareness and expectations, and therefore there could be some action. So this is a good, I think, change that we now see in trade agreements that really include economic cooperation and collaborative programs between the parties in that area. Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
No, thanks to you. And I think we have many experiences to keep studying and that young people came into this and make more research and analyze effects and be inventive and creative, so we can keep on trying to do a more inclusive trade policies in our agreements and in our different countries. So now moving to your chapter, Mia, going to the WTO. The organization has been accused for being gender blind in many times, not by you, not by me necessarily, but many times. And I would like to ask you if that's still the case, or it gained 2020 vision. I mean, do you think the WTO transformed into a gender-aware organization?
Well, you know, it's very tricky to talk about WTO, because people, when you say WTO, World Trade Organization, people can imagine different things, right? And so you can imagine a system of rules and agreements as in, you know, legal texts, and lawyers would typically see that behind WTO, right? You can imagine WTO as member states and their representatives, and so obviously all the negotiators and people involved in Geneva processes would probably see WTO in that context. Or you can see WTO in a context of, you know, what we see when we talk about other international organizations, their secretariat and the people that work in the WTO. And so then when you look at that last sort of interpretation or visualization of WTO, obviously in the last few years, we have seen engendering of that organization, because in Nagozi, we have seen, you know, the first woman director general, and of course we now have by rule 2 deputies that are women, etc. There are probably similar successes in changing the share or the proportion of women that are directors of the divisions. I don't think it's 50-50 yet, but it's moving in that direction. But maybe more importantly, equally importantly, at least, we need to see what are the engendering, or I call it feminization processes in these other two visualization or interpretation of the WTO. So when you look at from the rules, or as a body of rules, as I already mentioned, we haven't made any progress, right? So you do have this explicit non-discrimination clause in one of joint initiatives on the domestic regulation in services, but it didn't enter really so explicitly in any other agreements that are being negotiated at that level as joint initiatives. There are implicit mentions, and probably they are of course useful, but we, as no other multilateral agreements apart from fisheries have been tackled yet, there is no progress in that area. So that is really a sort of, if you would try to grade these we are both at universities, so we always imagine sort of giving grades to someone. It wouldn't be maybe soft D, right, in that regard. but then when you look at the membership itself, I think we have had some great progresses, and when you look at the gender composition or sex composition of the representatives, it has improved, but then going back to the members themselves, I am a little bit disappointed that we find still some members that decline recognizing that work on gender equality is related to trade. And they sort of put it in a category of non-trade issue and say that it should not be discussed at the level of the WTO in a context of entering into the rules book, or even into the work program of the WTO. So that's disappointing, because my previous hat was from the United Nations, as you mentioned, and we have worked very, very hard through the program on sustainable development goals to really deepen the understanding that trade is means to development, right? It's not end in itself. It is actually a means, a tool through which you build sustainable development. As such, it actually brings all these factors into under the trade objectives, and so you can't develop if you are not actually pursuing gender equality, and you can't have trade that would move towards development if you are excluding the importance or relevance of gender equality into the trade policy. So for me, it's a non irrelevant what the position of such countries is, and saying that it is strictly domestic issue, because it has very serious implications, as you know from research, on how trade actually across the borders impact women in different countries. So so I would say that WTO has made, in all these three different interpretations, has made some progress, definitely to be applauded, and we just need to move in that direction, hopefully through more explicit and more frank discussions at the ministerial conferences as well, right? We have just concluded MC13. I don't know if you want to talk about that, where we didn't have much sort of inputs related to gender equality or other inclusivity issues in the declaration. I don't know, you probably want to comment on that as well.
No, but we have at the MC12, we have for the first time final declaration. I don't think it's a great declaration either. We have a paragraph where they recognize the economic empowerment of women and the contribution of MSMEs. We will together in the same paragraph in the MC12, and then in the MC13. We also have the same paragraph that I think it was not easy to have this paragraph, but it was also just recognizing women's empowerment, and it's like reducing it to the participation in trade and the relevance to economic growth and sustainable development. Is again, as you mentioned in the before, is something also very not binding and not it's a small step forward, but doesn't consider any mandate for trade and gender or binding provision in this relationship. So I would like you to comment on, and also comment on probably the position of some countries. I think the light is getting
yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was it was difficult.
I was like a ghost.
It was difficult to see
Getting
it, right?
so sad for the MC13 that I was becoming a ghost.
Well, look, I mean, MC13 was a difficult ministerial, right? It's in a way, we went into it without having really some firm ground to stand on, because not many of the items on the agenda were actually firmed going into for the ministers just to have a look at and approve. And so you left the big part of negotiations into there, and when you leave it like that, then it is very difficult. And so there were big tickets on the agenda that they knew in advance that they wouldn't really move. And so when you have that, obviously the issues that some countries like India try to dispute having legitimate right to be on the agenda, have difficulty even entering the mention in declaration. So in that context, you are right. It is important that it remained mentioned, even though in such a very cursory way. But I think what is important to see is that this is a gradual process, and so we can't expect revolutionary changes through the ministerial conference immediately. And the work in the WTO, I think, is continuing very actively. So that through the informal working group on women and trade, I think certain other issues can be pursued further, and perhaps working with the member states in getting their full commitment and support for this to stay on the agenda for the WTO, right? So it's never-ending work, domestically or internationally, as you know, and I think we will need to build support through the WTO Research Hub on women and trade, to build really strong evidence in favor of the trade policy through trade agreements, explicitly address these questions, rather than to leave it to the other portfolios in policies. We often say, the argument that that India or similar countries have is that the trade is there to basically take care of creating a bigger pie, and then all other policies are there to worry about how these are distributed and who is and to create equality, and that equality should be deemed or perceived not from the universal way, but from the domestic sort of specific situations, right? So I personally have issue with that, and I think we need to we need to, you know, there are certain universal human rights, and that need to be adhered to, that include, of course, equality between women and men, and so I think that cannot be disputed at all. And I also believe that trade policy can, at least indirectly, pursue these goals. But to do that, it has to be given task to do that, and we can talk, you know, about nuances in and the speed to which that can be done. But I see this as a regular feature in trade policy formulation and trade agreements.
Thanks, Mia. I think we ran out of time, but I believe it's very important for the people who is listening in this interview to go to the website of the WTO Trade and Gender Office, also to the Mia Mikic page that she also has. Think on that. And the WTO Trade and Gender Office is working jointly with the WTO Gender Research Hub, that will offer capacity building, mentoring opportunities, and that we will have in 2025 the Youth Trade Summit on Gender. And Mia and I, we work at academic, so we want to invite you, all of you, to present your research. And thanks for this great interview. Thanks for all your help in preparing it. And I hope to see you soon and to have another interview trying to deal with all the advances in this topic next year.
Right. Thank you very much, Dorotea, for this conversation, and thank you very much for your work in this area. I think that is very important. And yes, let's continue this at the summit, if not before. I think there are other events that will be happening this year through the Aid for Trade review that can also tackle a very, you know, important issue of how do we promote gender equality through the Aid for Trade program and initiative. And then also, of course, we work through the research hub. We continue to provide better and more solid evidences on this. So thank you for giving the opportunity to talk about that. This is
and we should congratulate the Friends of Multilateralism group for tackling this issue, which is quite important that they suggest this issue to make an interview.
Yes, and let's close on that. Yes, here.
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.